Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another episode of Big Hero News, a live episode, which Thursdays nights was the not live, Chewy. It was the pre-recordeds, and this is lives. Hey man, how are you?
Hello. I'm very snoozy. I thought I was nodding off there for a wee sec.
I have an apology to make to you.
Oh no, what have you done?
I apologise. I know I was supposed to call you on Friday to take the dogs for a walk, but I actually spent most of the day in the studio.
I'm
very, very sorry, sir. Please forgive me.
That's fine.
Okay, cool.
I thought
That's
something
easy.
must have been up.
Oh my goodness. What a big show we have tonight. It's a really big show. So much going on. We're going to try and get through it all. But look, to be honest, if we have to drop something, we will and get onto it tomorrow. But you'll have read in the description, especially on the YouTube video, you can see how much we've got to do. So there's a lot going on. I want to keep you updated with a bunch of stuff that's happening though. And one of the things we want to keep you updated with is our fabulous patrons, Chewy. And you will maybe notice a slight difference here because we've had to reshape the billboards to get everybody on.
That's why you didn't want to go take the dogs for a walk on Fridays, trying to fit names onto a page.
We said
I'm on to you, buddy.
A genuine heartfelt thanks, whilst Chewy takes the piss. We said last week we are looking to get another 50 patrons. And you'll have noticed if you watch any of the clips, there was, to be honest, a very camp version of me. I don't know why I was quite so camp when I was like, hi there. I don't know why, but it kind of just came that way. And all of the clips last week, we put a little tag on them saying, you know, if you like what we're doing, come support us. Chewy, I said we're aiming for about 50. I didn't put a time frame on it. I think last week we got about, I think we got 40 people signing up, which is amazing. Nice. Like honestly, really amazing. And so what we've had to do is we've basically, you can see that looks like, oh, that's not very many, but that's because we have had to give ourselves a whole new page, Chewy. So we've given ourselves a whole new page of
Look
patrons.
At all of that room for activities.
I know, there's a lot of room there now. So, and there are so many people on here. I know I normally read them out. I'm actually going to go to the Patreon page just to read out all the names that I've found. And to be honest, I'm going to have to do a stock take. I may have missed one or two. I hope not. So let's say a big thanks to Phil R, Audrey, James Barnes. Is this right? Yeah, that's right. Sorry, I was just making sure of that. James Barnes, to Pia, to Julia Jean Davies, to Fiona Jenkins, to Azza, to Kathy Barakat, to Trevor Bacon, to Laurie, to Martin Ebert, to Amy Martin, to Kieran, to Kingy, to Elaine Walker, to Patricia Hosking, no, probably not. To Catherine, to Char, to Lee Adams, and all the people I read out last week. There's a bunch just from about Thursday through to today. So it's been incredibly gratifying, guys. We do genuinely thank you very much. It is something that really does help us do what we're able to do. It does pay a few bills around the place, and we're very, very grateful for it. And every time I say, what do you think, Chewy, you say things like, I say, so Chewy, what do you think of the patrons we've had come on board? You normally say something like,
oh, I don't know now. You've made my mind go blank.
Sorry, mate. I shouldn't have dropped it.
Humbled.
Yeah. So we are, I mean, like it's an arbitrary number. It doesn't get us to like full-time salaries or anything, but we're aiming for 50. We probably got, I mean, let's be honest, 35 to 40 last week. It was just amazing. So still throwing it out there. If you want to support what we want to do, you can do that. Also for the people who ordered merch last week, merch got sent away Sunday night. Order got sent away Sunday night. Merch order went away today, Monday. It'll come back to the printer probably tomorrow. He'll print them. I'll probably have them it'll come back tomorrow, next day, Tuesday, Wednesday. He'll print them Wednesday, Thursday. I'll have them Thursday, Friday, and they'll be going out on the weekend. So if you purchased merch last week, it will be all things going well. I mean, the timetable, unless something goes wrong, will be going into the post probably over the weekend. Friday at the earliest, probably Monday at the latest for you guys to get yours. If you haven't got yourself some merch yet, then you can get onto bhnshop.nz. And remember, we are doing a special with our buffer gear this month. As you can see by the colouring of it, we're giving a donation of the profits to medical aid for Palestinians. All right, Medical Aid for Palestinians is a charity based out of the UK that's in Gaza right now, offering aid to Palestinians, medical aid, in fact, Chewy. And we're giving a percentage of all our profits to them for their buffer shirts that are sold. And remember how we roll this? Other than the general BHN gear, which will always be around, when we do these kind of specials, they never return. Right, so this will be the only month you're going to be able to get this style of buffer top. Buffer shirts are going to be around for a while. We can talk more about what they're about later. But this brand, the black and the grey with the support for Palestinians colouring, is only going to be around for this till Thursday night, basically. So get in if you want them, bhnshop.nz. And again, thank you so much for our the support you guys have been giving us. It's been amazing. It's just been absolutely amazing. Chewy, we've got a guest to start the show off with, but before we wrap into that, is there anything that you want to drop? I've just been talking. Is there anything you want to drop in before we get into the show?
I just want to say, obviously, we didn't do a live show on Thursday because of Anzac Day. I had a very good Anzac Day, a big turnout here in Dunedin. Beautiful day. So if it's a day that you guys marked, I hope it was as good as my one. Outside of that, no. Let's roll on the apocalypse.
So you've probably all seen the poll on TVNZ tonight. We might throw that at Craig. I'm sure he'll have some things to ask about it. But this first part of the conversation, I wanted to speak to an economist about a common argument that we're seeing in the interwebs, Chewy. So I've asked Craig if he'd come on and talk to us about interest deductibility and government debt for a very specific reason. And I don't know, I'm sure Craig will want to have a crack at the latest breaking news from TVNZ. We want to welcome to the show from the CTU, Craig Renney. Craig, how are you, man?
I'm not too bad. Can you hear me?
I can. If you're on your phone, if you
Loud
turn
and
that
clear.
sideways, we'll probably get a lovely full screen from you as well, if you'd like to.
Well, let's try that one.
Oh, look at that.
There you go.
Just like a paid
Wide
one.
screen.
Hey, man.
There you go.
How you doing? You all right today? You're not too stressed on too many meetings?
No, it's been a full day. But the only stress has been my laptop deciding that the microphone was the right time for it not to work. So apologies to your viewers this evening because they're viewing this via my iPhone, so they can see it turns my glasses blue on the screen.
Looks perfect. Hey, Craig, now I've emailed you these two questions because I really want to figure this out. On the interwebs, in the social medias, there's been some common conversation, but I faced a bit of it over the weekend, and there was two questions that I wanted to ask. Two questions based around, as I said before, debt, New Zealand's debt, the debt the government has, the debt the country has, and also about interest deductibility. Here's the first question. So I put a tweet out, I don't know, some pithy, intelligent, clever tweet, I'm sure, Chewy, about the government, about, the response to COVID, about where we are right now, about the work that Labor did. And what always happens is someone's come back and goes, yeah, but if we weren't paying $6 billion a year in interest because they wasted so much money, then life would be so much easier. And I went, okay, let's look at that. So I jumped onto, I don't know, some website that talks us about our debt. And I found this. So here's the graph of New Zealand's debt going back to 2007. And my response to that person is that, if you're watching, you can see what I'm doing with my mouse. Down here is when the last, the two Labor governments left. And debt was around, let's call that 25 billion. Is that right? The debt?
Yep.
Yeah. 25 billion. Then National came in and it went from 25 billion to up towards 75 billion, give or take. So that's a $50 billion increase in debt under National. Now, also under National and continuing under Labor, it started to trend down and down and down and down and down to 2020, where it was about, I don't know, I'd call that 58 billion. And then COVID hit and it's up to 100 million. So the way I see that is before John Key's National government, our debt was about 25 billion. Then it became 75 billion under National. Then it became 100 billion under Labor. Round figures. and the only point I wanted to make on Twitter, and this is what I want to talk to you about, is yes, it's fair to say that Labor chose to borrow to get through COVID.
Yeah.
The result from that was more living New Zealanders and more businesses that stayed afloat. So I can see a tangible result for that debt. What I'd like to learn about is what the fuck did we get for the $50 billion that the national government gave us out of that debt? And that's the question I'd like for you to solve for me, please.
We've got a few things. I mean, the first thing in that chart is that it's measured in US dollars rather than in New Zealand dollars. So there's a currency fluctuation that happens in that space. But in terms of the, you're not wrong. Debt did increase very significantly during the last period of the National Party taking office. I'm sad enough to have all of the economic updates of the budget going back to 2007, so I can see all of the net core crown debt. And if I stare at net core crown debt when Labour lost office in 2008, net core crown debt, including the super fund, was zero.
Wow.
Damn.
So that's at the end of Helen Clark's reign, pretty much.
It was minus $2.676 billion. So we actually had a surplus.
So we're in credit rather than being in debt.
We're in credit, yeah. But on a net core crown debt basis or on a gross debt basis, which is the easiest way of comparing these things internationally, we had a debt that was about $31.3 billion in 2008. In 2013, that had more than doubled to $77.9 billion. And then by 2017, that had trebled to $91.5 billion.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So over that period of time, gross debt trebled. Now, the first thing you should always do in economics, whenever you see very large numbers like that, is just discount them. Think about them actually as a percentage of GDP.
Okay. People's
mortgages go up in comparison to 50 years ago, but they earn more. And as a consequence, it's actually about household incomes that are really important in that space. And net core crown debt as a percentage, or gross debt, as a percentage of GDP went up quite a lot. But as a percentage of GDP, it didn't treble over that period. What did it buy? It bought tax cuts. What did it buy? It bought underinvestment. What did it buy? It bought a series of things. Bought lots of roads. Between places, but did it buy happiness? I'm going to say certainly not. And one of the things that we didn't do during that period of time was invest in the public realm, was solve pay equity, was solve minimum wage, was solve a range of child poverty challenges. Child poverty came down, but it didn't come down anywhere near the rate it should have done. So we weren't getting the value for money for that debt that we did on the other side. Now, during COVID, there are 20,000 New Zealanders who are walking, living, and breathing as a consequence of the government's response.
Yeah, 100%.
Now, I don't want to put a monetary value on 20,000 lives, but debt did go up during that period of time. But we bought essentially life. We bought the economy not falling over. We bought a health service that was able to respond to the challenges put in front of it, one that didn't collapse, as we saw in countries overseas. And as a consequence, that investment will pay off for generations, for decades, because those people will be alive, their children will be alive, they will make investments, they will deliver productivity, they will deliver output. The Crown will make that money back over and over and over again. So what did we get from the National Party during that period of time? Well, we got, to be fair to them, the start and the delivery of our response to the Christchurch earthquake sequence.
Right. Okay, good point. Yeah.
And the Crown spent to date about approximately $38 billion on the Christchurch earthquake sequence. We saw a range of other smaller earthquakes, top of the North Island, the Kaikoura quakes, for example. Just before the last election in 2017, there was a fiscal response to that. But the argument is not, did the Crown borrow? The Crown did borrow. All governments borrow. The Crown borrowed quite a lot of money during that period of time. For most New Zealanders during that period of time, the value of the public realm and the quality of public services fell. And it fell not because debt was rising. It fell not because we were borrowing money. It fell because we were actually underinvesting. That's how we ended up with mold in hospital walls. You two, I don't know which one of you gentlemen, I think it's Pat, is in Dunedin.
We both are.
Yeah, and I can tell you in the great city that is Dunedin, we're currently rebuilding, the government's currently rebuilding the hospital.
Yep.
And it's going to cost more than $1.5 billion, right? And it's money well spent. What I can't tell you is the cost of lives lost, of productivity lost, of training opportunities lost for not rebuilding the hospital for the 20 years it should have been rebuilt. And we can measure the cost in terms of the debt that wasn't undertaken, but we don't measure the cost on the other side. And unfortunately, the cost is borne on the other side by real people. The cost isn't borne by the government. And so that's why national governments or governments of the right tend to focus on debt reduction, because they're not the ones paying the cost on the other side.
It's interesting because you bring up the earthquake, and I'm like, of course. So you've given us a tangible thing to look at. But what you don't hear today, like I literally had someone text me over the weekend, or tweet me over the weekend, or excrete me, whatever you call an X these days, over the weekend. So like a few 91-year-olds got saved for another year, and it was lumbered on the shoulders of our children for a generation. It's funny how you don't hear that about the Christchurch earthquake. Yeah, so like, a few 91-year-olds got another flat for a year, and it got lumbered on the shoulders of our children. It feels that disinformation doesn't, that feeling around COVID and the paying to it has a very different vibe amongst the community.
Yep, and I mean, in Christchurch, we had the benefit of rebuilding assets that will be there for 100 years, right?
Yeah.
Great, yeah. And so there's a positive benefit to Cantabrians and to the rest of New Zealand. We kept families together. Parents, grandparents didn't die. Kids didn't die. I come from a country the UK, which managed this appallingly. And we saw tens, if not hundreds of thousands of excess deaths during that period of time. I know which response I will be proudest of, and it's not the UK one. So in terms of when someone says that's the case, we saved a few grannies, right? Well, okay, I want you to go and tell me what's the value of your grandmother's life?
Yeah. This is the last question, though. The question is, are you okay with more debt for more alive New Zealanders? You can say no, but you can't have it both ways. You can say, no, I'd rather have the businesses open sooner and more dead people. I'd rather have, the borders shut for a bit longer and have more live. That's the only two options. And for me personally, I'm okay with, so we're facing a bit more debt now than some of the other countries that opened up earlier. Yet the ones that opened up earlier have those terrible death statistics, and we've got better ones. I'm okay with the payoff at the moment. It's going to be a bit harder.
Well, actually, Pat, we're not, because net core current debt in New Zealand on the internationally comparable measure is below that of Australia. It's below that of the UK. It's below that of the US. It's below that of most European countries. It's net core current debt on the IMF measure is 5 times the New Zealand rate in Japan. No one is accusing the Japanese economy of not being productive or not delivering outcomes for its people. Public debt and the response to COVID, the debt that we accrued is still leading us nowhere near any kinds of debt ceiling. The Treasury at the budget policy statement this year, so led by the new Minister of Finance, said that our levels of debt were within the bounds of prudence. So even the Treasury doesn't think we have a debt problem in New Zealand. The last time we had a debt issuance in February, it was 700% oversubscribed. So there were 7 times more people wanting our debt than actually the debt that we tried to issue. So we have no debt crisis in New Zealand. The crisis we have in New Zealand is an underinvestment crisis. The debt crisis we have in New Zealand is a public realm crisis. That we have in New Zealand is a productivity crisis. We don't solve any of those problems just by simply arbitrarily cutting our debt.
Don't know about YouTube, but I think I just found a clip for tomorrow to go out. A little short clip there. I like that one. Do you want to jump in with any of these questions about the debt before we move into interest deductibility?
Yeah, you used a lot of words there, but none of them said that Grant Robertson spent all my grandkids' future. So that doesn't help in the election. So we're just going to disregard it. Do you think that National relies on the fact that talking about economics makes a lot of people go cross-eyed, and you can't really put the debt's actually okay on a bumper sticker and win an election. Are they relying on people's lack of knowledge in this field to get wins on the board?
Well, people have a natural aversion to debt, right? Nobody likes paying debt back. People like the things debt delivers, but they don't like then paying it back. I mean, I've got a car outside, and it's great. I'm still paying for it. I hate it, but I like the fact that I have a car. I like the fact there are hospitals. I like the fact there are schools. But people don't like national debt. They think there's something being held over them, and it's a quite natural aversion people have. And when you use very large numbers, when you say debt last year was $89.11 billion, and it's like, well, what on earth does that mean? And so there's quite a natural aversion to wanting to have more debt, even though debt is just a tool. Debt is just an instrument. We have good debt and bad debt. We spent what $30-odd billion on a flag 30-odd million dollars on a flag referendum, which is probably borrowed. Is that good debt or bad debt? But if we spend $30-odd million helping families into new housing, it's both. They both are debt, but do we get better outcomes? And that's the thing. We shouldn't be worried about debt. Debt's just a tool. It's just a means to do something. What we should be worried about is actually what we do with it and the kinds of outcomes that we get from that debt.
So if I borrowed 50 grand to put a new roof on my house, that's good debt. That's a good idea.
Well, assuming you need a new roof on your house, yes.
Yeah, no, I just wanted a different color. Yeah. No, my roof is leaking, and I borrowed money to get a new roof. That's good debt. If I borrowed the same amount of money and went down to the dairy and spent it on sweets, that would be bad debt.
Good weekend though, bad debt, but a good weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, assuming you weren't cornering the market in lollies in the South Dunedin area, then that would be bad debt. If, for example, you chose to spend a lot of money keeping people unemployed on benefits, that's probably bad debt. If you spent some money and possibly borrowed some more money and through active labour market programs got people into work, got people trained, lifted people's ability to earn, that's probably good debt. You're actually more in debt, but the economy is better off. Households are better off. And from an economic perspective, their households are more sustainable. Their incomes are more sustainable in the future. Sure, the Crown has marginally more debt, but frankly, that's its job.
Hey, I want to move on to the next question because I remember this conversation on Twitter was going up around landlords, because everyone's saying like, oh, look how good it is when the government cuts its cloth better. It can give $1.7 billion to Pharmac. And my response is things like, imagine what they could do if they hadn't given that $3 billion back to landlords. And the response from that is often, yeah, but it's just the government giving back the money that already belongs to the landlords. They're just giving their money back. And I'm too dumb to fully understand it. But interest deductibility implies to me, you'll correct me in a second, because I'll just put my dumb thoughts out there first. Interest deductibility implies to me that the bank gets their money, the landlord pays their money, and then the taxpayer gives money back to the landlord. Sort of, we're the ones that get nothing for it, the taxpayers. It feels a bit like a charity. You know how if I give money to a charity, I give money to a charity, and then the government just gives that money back to me, a portion of it back to me. And I'm trying to figure out, firstly, is it their money they're just getting back? Or is there something that the taxpayer is missing out because we're contributing the money that's going back to them? Or is it just less tax coming in income? Yeah, I need dumb explanation for dumb man.
Okay. This is not a straightforward exercise, so forgive me. All tax is money taken from someone. So so when someone says or when someone says I'm not getting the same tax break that I was getting earlier, and they say, but so it's just me getting my money back. No, because you're just not getting the same tax break you were before. That's a tax increase. If I give you back your tax break, that's a tax cut because you're now paying less tax. So in terms of mortgage deductibility, interest deductibility, tax is usually paid on the income received. So an income received is net income. So when you make payments out as a firm, the net income after you've made all of your payments is what you then pay tax on. So if it costs you $100 to make 100 loaves, but you sell them for $200, you've made $100 net income, and you pay tax on the $100, not the $200 of activity that's taken place.
Yeah, the profit.
That profit. Interest is a cost against profit. And so the argument goes, you should be able to write that off as a cost as you would house maintenance, as you would insurance, as you would anything else that costs you in running a business, because you're running a business when you rent a house. The strange thing about housing is that it doesn't obey any of the other rules of running a business.
Yeah,
if you buy a piece of plant or equipment and you turn the key in the ignition because you just bought it, it devalued instantly. And if you basically traditionally run a piece of equipment into the ground, so you've got a depreciation line for that. Houses go up in value. And when the government is giving you your interest back that you're paying the bank, it's actively helping you create new wealth for yourself and for landlords. And so as a consequence, the Crown ends up contributing to the new net wealth of a landlord. So the landlord is better off as a consequence of the Crown's tax position.
I think it was Anna Burns Francis who said to the Prime Minister on one of her shows, when he was saying things like, well, every other business just gets to pay this much in tax. And she said very quickly, yeah, but every other business also pays tax on their capital gains, whereas a landlord doesn't. So it's not like every other business, is it?
Well, so we don't, no other firm in New Zealand or no other industry in New Zealand pays tax on its capital gains. Because we don't have a capital gains tax in New Zealand, but people do pay tax on the income that they've generated. Workers pay tax on the income they earn from the first dollar of income that they own. Then landlords are the only ones who get to write off the costs, the interest costs of actually helping them to create an asset that gives them additional wealth that's not taxed anywhere. So if they were taxed when they sold the property later on, that would be fine. We could do interest rate deductibility because they've paid tax at some point in the system, just like someone who earns a living has paid tax through their wages. Landlords are the only people who get to write off the costs of earning that living through interest rate deductibility and then pay no tax at the point of sale for their property.
Yeah. So rather than saying other businesses pay on their capital gains, we should be saying other businesses pay on their profits or their income.
Their profit and all of their income. So most systems in New Zealand for tax are what are called EET, exempt, taxed. So you pay money to get materials or goods and services together to deliver a service. You get to write off the taxes at that point. That's exempt. When you sell goods or services, you collect GST, but that's also exempted because it's paid for by the end consumer. Your profits at the end of the day are taxed, EET.
Gotcha.
Property is the only source of income, which is EEE. It's exempted all the way through. And so the only tax that's paid is on the rental payments. And so what mortgage deductibility does is adds a huge tax loss to the rental payments. So the tax lost through those rental payments is then much reduced. The side effect of that is it makes renting a hugely more attractive industry that pushes up house prices because lots of people want to get into that as a much more tax efficient way of saving. And secondly, it reduces the ability of first home buyers to buy a house because landlords can buy a house knowing they can write off their interest costs, whereas a property owner can't.
So that means that if you've got money that you want to invest, the smartest single thing you can do to grow it is to put it into housing, a non-productive asset, rather than investing in a business or somebody's startup idea and that sort of thing, which is why we have this productivity crisis that you're you're talking about. We're not producing something. We're just selling old houses to each other.
Bernard
And
Hickey famously
the number
said that
always goes up.
Yeah, Bernard Hickey famously said that we have a housing market with an economy tacked on. And we're very good at selling houses and coffees to each other. But after that, we're not very good at all. The rest of our economy is pretty low productivity, be that in, we sell raw logs overseas, we sell milk powder overseas, we sell tourism experiences in New Zealand, and that's pretty much it. We're not very good at actually selling things that have value added, where we add something to a raw product and then sell it overseas as a more desirable commodity. The reason for that is, why would you invest in plant, equipment, technology, R&D, innovation, if you can get far higher returns, tax-free returns, much safer returns in the housing market?
Yeah, and you own a physical brick and mortar building. It's what I always remember people saying about it is like, if the housing market goes up or down, you've still got that physical thing, unlike shares.
Yep, you still got or alternatively, if you own, if you're trying to own a patent, or you're trying to own an industrial process, or you're trying to own intellectual property, you get taxed.
Yeah. So back to that original question, when people say, well, it's just them getting their own money back, what's the answer to that then in a nutshell? We just explained.
We say property owners or landlords, are the only people who benefit from a fully exempt taxation source. They don't pay money. They get their tax back when they pay their mortgage. They get their tax back when they do any other good service to the house, in terms of any repairs, maintenance, depreciation. And when they sell the property, they don't pay tax. Right? Anybody else who runs a firm pays tax on all their profit. They get to write off the costs of interest from any borrowings that they've done. But if they sell a good or a service, they're paying tax at that point in time. A worker, as soon as they cross the threshold of their workplace and earn a living, they're paying tax. They pay tax on the consumption of their goods and services. They don't get to write off their GST. They pay tax on all of their savings. They pay tax on their Kiwi saver. Right? There's a reason why not having a capital gains taxation system in New Zealand causes these disparities. And if we want to do, I would be fully behind reinstalling interest rate deductibility for landlords the millisecond we have a comprehensive capital gains tax that excludes the family home.
There you go.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yep,
Joey, you want to wrap up with anything?
Not really, I guess, directly with this, but I mean, there's other things in our society that are affected by this as well. Like the fact that people can't get into their first home in a timely manner means that they're putting off starting families. That means that there's a big chunk of our population that go into their retirement without their own asset. They're renting until death.
Yeah.
I think we're starting to see those effects now, and it's only going to get worse. Like I think of my own parents are both renting. And
there's a few things in there. So, for example, the welfare state only works because people own their own homes. Because the costs of supporting pensioners and paying their rent is so enormous that the welfare state would need far more money. Two, wealth inequality explodes as you end up with more and more landlords owning more and more property. Because if people don't own their own homes, they don't have the ability to accrue an asset to support them during their retirement, or to support their kids into homes. And we see huge intergenerational inequality. If your parent owns a home and can afford and can be bank of mum and dad to get their kids into property ownership. And then finally, from a straight right-wing perspective, we have fewer small businesses because people have fewer properties to hedge against starting up a firm.
Yeah.
If you want to see a more productive economy, have more homeowners. If you want to see more homeowners, have a capital gains tax system so that we have fewer people using the system to deliver that sort of advantage.
Craig, there's several super chats that have come while we've been talking, asking you questions. Are you okay to take a few questions from the punters?
Of course.
All right. Junk Rig Sailor, a super chat, thank you for the $10, says, Craig, does a rich country's debt really matter? USA has trillions of debt and they just raise their debt ceiling and borrow more. They are never going to pay it back. Why should we either?
Debt does really matter, but what really matters is confidence in debt. The US can issue trillions of dollars of debt because people have confidence the US will pay it back. And that's how it has the ability to issue so gigantic levels of debt. If New Zealand issued gigantic levels of debt, the question would be, can New Zealand pay that back in the same way? People will always believe the US will pay back its own debt. The level of debt is unimportant. What's important is the confidence of the markets that you will pay it back. And secondly, if you're using the debt for useful purposes, if we're building infrastructure, if we're building housing, if we're doing the things that will deliver us a more productive and sustainable economy in the future, the debt pays itself. The key challenge is that if we issue debt, we're using it for a good purpose. We're not just simply giving it back as a tax cut, which unfortunately looks like what we're likely to do at the next budget.
Yeah. Mr. Arvid says, King Craig, I heard this Prime Minister job might be going soon. You should apply. LOL. That's just more of a comment than anything else. There's
very generous.
A couple of comments here rather than questions. You can speak to them if you want, though. Peter says borrowing money isn't a bad thing for a government if it's for capital assets. It amortizes the cost.
Yeah.
Borrowing for tax cuts is nuts, though. I kind of often think about the economy maybe too simplistically, like a personal, like if I borrow money and buy something that's disposable, food or whatever, but if I borrow money to buy the house, then that's the asset sort of thing. I kind of see it as a similar sort of thing. I guess that's what Peter's saying in a much smarter way.
Well, it's not even. There are situations in which you should borrow just to simply push money out of windows. If the economy's tanking, if we have a huge recession, a depression, the job of the government at that point in time is to stimulate demand, is to stimulate growth. So you should borrow and just simply pay people to dig holes and fill them, to quote Keynes. Because what you're doing is you're inducing demand in the economy. There are times when you should pull money actively out of the economy. If the economy is going gangbusters, the economy is red hot, you shouldn't borrow to actually then spend more money, because you'll be acting pro-cyclically. Most people think about government spending like their own household. If they're in debt, it's bad. If they've got lots of money, that's good, right? Think of the opposite. When the economy is doing really well, that's when the government should withdraw and not add to stimulus. When the economy is not doing really well, like now, that's when the government should be adding and should be stimulating and helping people into work.
That's the other thing that I was mentioning with someone over the weekend. It's like, in my adult brain, if you're going through sort of austerity measures and cutbacks, you would therefore hope and want and expect that at the end of this term, because of those cutbacks and because of the government saving money, we would see a big reduction in that debt. Like, we would hope they'll have paid some down, but if they're just borrowing to get like a net zero so they can give tax cuts, then we're going to get to the end of this term and it's going to be no better, if not worse, even though it's been a much more austere time we've been living in.
Oh, well, certainly. And that's been the experience in the UK, is that, when the Conservative Party took over in 2010, huge austerity program, delivered quite savage cuts to many public service departments and many bits of local government. Did the UK improve? No, of course it didn't. But is the UK economy better off than it was in 2010? No. It's just simply we cut our cloth, we reduced spending and hoped that things would get better. This is why a lettuce lasted longer than a prime minister in the UK. But that sort of magical thinking, that simply if we just cut our cloth, if we just simply reduce our spending, if we just simply manage what we're doing better, if we just have a bit less ambitious for the country, then we'll be okay. We have to recognize that as an economy, there are things that we need to do. There's economic development that needs to occur. There's jobs that need to occur. Otherwise, We're just simply buying a smaller economy and less growth in the future. And that's what an austerity agenda does.
Hey, Chewy, we've got to let Craig go. I'm going to give him one more super chat before we head off. But is there anything you want to wrap up with as well, Chewy? I'm going to cut it short for you. So.
I just want to say there's clear historic examples of what you're talking about, of like when times are bad, you spend the money. Germany building its Autobahn system in the 30s, the massive projects post stock market collapse that they had in the US, massive work programs just to get people working. They built dams and highways, and even here in New Zealand in the 80s, the Think Big projects were basically that idea as well, if I'm correct.
Yeah, and there are plenty of examples, all around the world of essentially of government-led economic development, where it says we're going to do some things. There probably isn't the demand for these goods and services right now, but by the end of that period, we will have got ahead of the investment curve, and we'll be a better economy. We'll be a more productive economy as a consequence. Some of the best investments aren't actually physical. They're investments in education. They're investments in skills. They're investments in health, because they have multi-generational payoffs. And as a consequence, this is not just simply about investing in bricks and mortar. This is investing in people and making sure that actually they have the ability to thrive in the future and have some income and economic security in the future. Because when we have that, we don't have populist governments in countries that are secure. We have populist governments in countries where the population is economically and income insecure.
We'll let you go, Craig. We've held you for too long. We thank you for your time, though. I just wanted to say Spiderhoof says, hi, Craig, love your knowledge bomb with an excellent mahi on how fiscally inept this government is. Speaking of this government, we won't hold you for this, Craig. We'll go and do it in a second, though. I mean, there was a poll out today.
Yep.
OneNews poll. Obviously, the poll means nothing when it comes to electing a government. I think what it does do, though, is it does comment on the feel of the nation as to how it's a referendum on how the government's doing and how ACT are doing and how New Zealand First is doing primarily above everything else. Do you want to add anything to what we saw on OneNews tonight?
Just one thing. It's sort of a note of caution and a note of optimism. I've worked for oppositions when we've been at terrible lows for the Labour Party, and I've worked for governments when we've been at stratospheric highs. Polls are polls, but what it does do is it does suggest that the public has bought change, but it's not necessarily sure it likes the change that's happened, and it's not necessarily sure it likes how that change is being delivered. We have approximately 950 days until the next election. We have to spend every single day telling the public, telling New Zealanders there's a better way of doing this than the way that this government is doing what it's doing right now. And if we don't, we'll have missed our opportunity, because if we get them out after one term, we can undo the damage they're doing right now. If we get them out after 3 terms, that's a much harder job.
Oh, both inspiring and terrifying what you just said at the end there, Craig. So thank you for joining us tonight. I'm always grateful when you jump in, and we'll talk again super soon. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Jets.
All right, thanks, Craig.
Thanks so much, Craig.
Now listen, folks, just so you know, we've got a bit of a glitch with our super chats tonight. Normally it automatically stars them for us. I don't know if you've noticed too, but they haven't been starring themselves. I've been doing it.
Okay.
I apologize if we miss anybody's. There was a couple of other comments here as well, not necessarily direct questions. It's in the ballot for $5. Thank you. It says most businesses pay GST on their sales. Only residential rent, sales / income and interest at the bank income are exempt from GST. Frosty says, just became a patron. Oh, welcome on
Yay!
Hiding
Nice
my
one.
whānau. And Nick says, great chat. Additional to this is my late fee. So if I've missed anyone's super chat, I apologize. As I said, normally it just highlights them automatically for us. It's not doing that today. So true, if you see a chat come up in there, make sure it's starred so we don't miss it at the end of each segment. Right. Anything you want to mention about when it comes to the conversation just then, shall we? Because I want to talk, even though I agree with Craig that, we've said this all this year, polls don't really matter at the moment. Mm-hmm. And I think polls don't matter at the moment when it comes to making a government. Oh, this government would be voted out on. It doesn't matter. But what it does do is it does show a snapshot of how the polled people are feeling about this government. And I think that's a fair thing to discuss. So before we jump into that,
that's fair.
Should we just rip in?
Yeah, go on.
All right, here we go. TVNZ tonight. Let's have a look at the news.
He a whātōranga pū te haere ake nei, political turbulence ahead. Buckle up, brace for impact. National is down 2 points on 36. Those votes gobbled up by Labour, back in the respectable 30s for the first...
I mean, not to poo-poo it already. It's margin era stuff. You know, it is margin era stuff, but it's still... I'll let it play. I'll let it play.
Time in 9 months. Also up to the Green Party on 14, the Chloe Swarbrick co-leadership effect in full flight. But here comes the turbulence. ACT is continuing its free fall, now on 7, down for our 4th poll in a row, and bang, New Zealand First is down and out on 4. Winston Peters would not...
Down and out. You're gone. Didn't you know, Winston? You might as well just leave now. Just pack up your gear and go home, Winston.
Gone burger.
Apparently you're no longer in government, according to OneNews.
Be in Parliament in what could be May Day for the coalition. Rounding things off, Te Pāti Māori steady on 4, maintaining one of its highest results in the OneNews variant poll. Let's ring around this way now to see how those numbers translate to seats in the House. National would have 48 seats in blue on that side. ACT gets 9.
I don't really care so much about this stuff.
And without New Zealand First, not enough.
Interesting though, interesting in a poll result, because of course Winston's not there. Like, well, he's 1% in a poll 2.5 years out. Let's not get too hyperbolic about this.
And Te Pāti Māori with 6 seats is kingmaker. Time to bring up the preferred Prime Minister numbers now. And
interesting, this is
news
interesting.
For Christopher Luxon, down 2 points on 23%. Chris Hipkins up 1 on 16. Chloe Swarbrick bouncing up 2 points to 6, nudging ahead of David Seymour, who's up 1 on 5. And Winston Peters is plummeting with his party down.
Did you get that? 2% is plummeting
to 4. So there it is, a nightmare poll for the coalition government, which has been in power for just 5 months. Is the honeymoon period over?
So this is, I mean, like I said, okay, lots of hyperbole there. Lots of, this is the most incredible news there's been this week in politics.
Strap in. It's all going down.
Strap on. You know.
Get the kids.
But here's something, I'm not going to show you this clip, but something interesting that came out of this is when Mikey was talking to the Silver Fox, Simon Dallow, she did say that she'd done the research over the recent few years, and 2015, I think it was, in 2015, the key government could have been voted out at 5 months on the polling, wouldn't it? But, you know, but at the same time, and the same for the Clark government in 2006. Now, the difference is, both that key government and the Clark government were a third term government. So I'm suggesting that this has never happened before in a first term government. And here's the thing that I find particularly interesting, Chewy. To me, what it says is, you know how Bomber said the other night, once Winston gets out, there'll be a snap election? Like that was sort of this vibe around the place. Yeah. Luxon's brand National, is being tarnished by the other 2 toxic leaders. Primarily Seymour is tarnishing brand National. Secondarily, Peters is tarnishing brand National. There's going to be a point where they're going to have to either decide, do we stick with this toxic environment? Remember, Mr. Luxon, we've said this 100 times, if you open the door, you own anything that breaks. That it feels like the voting base, the voters are looking at it going, as we've heard lots of times, we didn't vote for this. We didn't vote for no more anti-smoking laws. We didn't vote for the penis police. It's not what we voted for. You know, Bomber says it all the time, to evoke his name again. You know, the National voters voted for their house prices to go up by 10%. They didn't vote for what they're seeing, so it's making them uncomfortable. The problem is, of course, Chewy, if at some stage Luxon makes that stand to break from Team Toxic, then you've got a snap election as well. So I find this to be an interesting snapshot right now as to what some people are saying. Yours, sir.
Yeah, I agree. Like people, like Craig said as well, people voted for change. They didn't necessarily pay any attention to what that change could be. And there were certainly no promises from any one of the 3 coalition partners that the change was going to be good. They just said change.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think, like, when you're saying that, other governments saw this in their second or third term, we're seeing it in this one's first term. I can't remember a government that has come out of the election so hard on such aggressive policies so quickly. And it was like, surely they must have known. Surely they've got feelers out of why people have voted for them, but they have taken it as a carte blanche. No, we're government. Everybody knows what we stood for. So full steam ahead. And it's really caught the voting base out, I think.
Let me offer something? Because I've given this explanation, this observation before, that what happens, a government will get elected when it comes to the centre and the other guys have gone to their natural place. And then the other guys will start coming back towards the centre, and this government that's been elected centristly, start heading slowly back to where they normally are. And then the public goes, oh, too far. And then they bring the other guys in. Maybe what you're saying is true. And maybe it makes sense that these guys are at a place now, 5 months in, where in days gone by, they would have been at in their third term. Like they're already there. They've gone from being, they weren't centrist, but National was more centrist than the others. And they've just jumped straight to where they would be normally in the third term. And instead of people going, well, they've been in for 3, it's time for a change, because that's what people say after they've drifted back, because they're back there immediately. People are like, shit, what's going on? So maybe what you're saying about their natural place and how fast is because they're now moving so fast. They're at a place where they would normally be in their third term already.
Yeah. And I think there is also an effect of, look, National said a lot of the things that even if your side got a hiding, that you would want them to, his speech was like, oh, I'm going to govern for all New Zealanders and that sort of thing. He said that before he got into a negotiating room with ACT and New Zealand First.
Yeah.
And I think that has shown the negotiating skills weren't there either, because those guys have been able to fucking dog walk Luxon up and down, trying to put out fires. Was it today that the question was asked to Seymour of like what would happen if Luxon decided that he didn't want an ACT MP in his cabinet and unilaterally sacked him, and Seymour said he wouldn't be able to. Like
we said that last week, didn't we? When he got rid of 2 of his, we said we'll believe this leadership bullshit when he fires a New Zealand First or an ACT minister. Then we'll believe the leadership, the decisive leadership he's talking about.
And I think you're right to identify like Luxon as a brand. Like this is what he knows. It's not about the party. It's about him. It's him as a leader. It's what he was going to do. It's all that sort of thing. So all of this stuff blows up and covers him in shit. And he doesn't know what to do about it, because
100%.
he's a corporate mover. He's not a politician. And this is what happens when people go, oh, well, that's a good thing that he's not a politician. It's not, because he doesn't know how to deal with other politicians. He doesn't play this game. He plays a different game, and it doesn't work. Every time someone puts up a guy in a leadership position and says, what I like about him is he's not a politician, this is always a fucking disaster.
Yeah.
Because it's a corporate paper shuffler or it's a general. And those are your only 2 choices if it's not a politician.
The corporate situation as well, running a business from a corporate position from the boardroom, if your business delivers dividends to the shareholders, you're seen as successful. That could not be any further removed from, you now have to negotiate and rely on a first-term MP from a far-right party who is now a minister because the leader of that party had some power, and anything they do wrong smears you with that shit you were talking about. So brand Luxon is being tarnished by these other, and I just think that if I was Luxon, you know what I mean? He must just be going, these guys are making it so much harder for me to get my knighthood. It's like, well, what's he going to be remembered for? You see him in the street in 5 years from, thanks for cancelling that smoking, Luxon. You know what I mean? It's like, what is he going to be remembered for? Oh, no one liked you from day one, Luxon. What is it going to be? It's just fascinating. It's fascinating. Anywho, anything else on that? We've got some other stuff to get to.
The other aspect is a side aspect of just the media's reporting of this sort of stuff. Yeah. And I just like Mikey's great, but the hyperbole on a poll like this.
Goodbye, New Zealand first.
I called it out before the election, and I'm going to call it out again here. This sort of breathless, running down the hallway, but stop the presses, the fucking polls have come in, is not helpful. Showing me seats in the House 3 years out from an election is not fucking helpful. Show me the trend. Like, she mentioned it once, 4th poll in a row, the ACT have gone down. But all of these changes are within the margin of error. But if you're showing a trend over time, well, then you're showing me the rot. I think for Labour, they've got to look at Chippy on 16% and go, what do we do? Like, I'm not one of the people that think necessarily Chippy needs to go. But his team needs to go. We've got to get number go up.
No, I think what they do is they continue on with how they are for another 12 months or so, and then he graciously steps aside. So what he's been able to do is he's the captain that's come on board the sinking ship. He's patched up the holes, and then it's time to hand it on to the next captain to because then then a Kieran or someone else isn't going to get covered in the dirt and the shit now. Patch up the holes, and in about 12 months he bows out gently and with mana and says, my time has been, it's time for such and I will be here to support them, and the next one comes in with 18 months to the next election. That's what I think.
They're strong and stable, as much as I hate that
totally
I think there is, in all fairness, an aspect of, I mean, we're seeing it here, right? There's so much that's wrong, and there's so much that's going on, and every new statement from an MP or a new policy comes out, or something gets rammed through, and we're staring down the barrels of a budget. You do descend into the thing of barking at passing cars. Yeah. Everything needs barking at. Everything is wrong, but you can't just do everything. It's kind of like you've got to zero in on one bedrock thing and just start hammering the foundations.
Just thought before we move on, you were saying, Chippy, we're on that 16, we need to see it start going up. What the hell are they saying to Luxon on the 9th floor at the moment? 23 as a new Prime Minister. 23 is so much more of an embarrassment for a current Prime Minister who's been there for 5 months than 16 is for the guy who just lost. You know what I mean? 23. Anyway, hey, we're going to keep trucking because we did have some stories to talk about today. We might go through these a bit quickly. We might drop the Plunket one till tomorrow, but it's fun.
Actually, before we do that, I'm just going to put up that, like, we're talking about the trend, just real quick. I promise, Pat, I promise. It was a graph that I saw today, consumer confidence. Now, generally not a fan of anything that is a survey on confidence. I famously hate the business confidence one. But again, it can be used to show a trend. And there's a very subtle blue line through this of when Luxon was appointed.
Very subtle. I almost didn't notice it, Chewy.
It's very subtle.
Very subtle.
But you just see that consumer confidence goes through the floor. So, yeah, the people aren't feeling it, and I think as soon as these health cuts bite and people get their surgeries cancelled and the waiting lists go up further, and then later on in the year when the rates rises ripple through all the councils, that's going to hit.
We'll do these chats first that came in because they came in during that story. Mr. Arvids, I'm going to burp. Mr. Arvid said that. He said, I get knocked out, I get up again. Oh no, I just got knocked back down again. Just like that. Mr. Arvids again, fast tracking their downfall, LOL. Gold for $5, thank you, sir. According to the Digital Grapevine, Seymour's a strong contender for title of humanity's epic fail. The Kiwi Weasel just wants to encourage the group. Great mahi. Keep it up the great mahi for your $2 super chat. Thank you, Kiwi Weasel. And Peter says for $5, Luxon thought he was getting an ace rimmer, but he got the regular one instead, who I hear is the worst person in the world. Oh, there's a lot of people watching live right now. Many of them won't understand that joke, an ongoing joke. That's
all right. We'll remind them.
All right, let's have a look at Pharmac, because on its surface level, you think $1.8 billion going into Pharmac is a good thing. There are a couple of contenders of concern around this. We'll get to it shortly, but let's have a look at the announcement made by I think he's a doctor, isn't he? Dr. Samore? Is that his name? Is he French? No, he's French Canadian. Dr. Samore. About Pharmac today and the announcement for more funding for Pharmac.
We inherited a very challenging circumstance. To be perfectly frank, the previous government just wasn't honest with the books and left us with a fiscal cliff of monumental proportions.
That means the record boost likely won't actually fund any new medicines, just allow Pharmac to keep paying for the ones it already does.
This now gives us the certainty into out years that we can continue funding the medicines that we've already funded.
Effectively, Pharmac's increased budget was given time-limited funding. So as David Seymour is showing in this graph, it was going to fall away if the government...
So here's the question, and I don't know this yet, but it was funded to a point. Isn't it the same as every government funding? That it's funded to 2030, it's funded to 2026. It's funded to, or is it always there and always should be available and has Labor... kind of cook the books to make it look better than it was. I mean, obviously National knew about it because they say they're putting more money into Pharmac now, which is going to get us nothing new, but there's more going in.
So, yeah, I often think about this as well because they've talked about fiscal cliffs a lot leading up to the election and after the election. So it's their argument being that the previous government should have sky-high funding into another government's term? Did they not get a say in that?
I think what they're saying is they didn't fund it beyond the last term, but you're right. I guess they could have said this is going to be funded till 2030, but then what would have stopped National just coming in going, hey, all there's other things we're appealing, we're changing that too. So I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not actually defending Labor here because I don't know, but this government has repealed so many Labor decisions financially, whether they had or hadn't funded this through to the year 2100. It feels like when something is funded, National's been going, we can't afford to fund this, we're stopping it. And when something isn't funded, they're going, can you believe they didn't fund it beyond this year? It's like they're kind of having their cake and eating it too, it feels somewhat, Joey.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll keep going with this, shall we? See what Dr. Samore has got to say about this.
Government chose not to fill the gap.
But right now, we've inherited a fiscal cliff where we have to save the furniture.
We should start a drinking game with Fiscal Cliff.
I mean, this is real. Pharmac would have been basically choosing not which new things to fund, but which things that people are currently getting they should take away.
Politicians very rarely will have to make a decision that directly impacts upon a person's life. Depending on the level of funding they give Pharmac will determine whether or not some New Zealand patients will live or they will die.
There are currently 140 applications on Pharmac's options for investment list, the list of medicines it would fund if it had the budget to do so.
I would like to, but the reality is that we're not going to.
Sorry, can I finish that sentence? But the reality is we need $3 billion to go back to landlord. This is some of the Twitter conversation that's been going around today. See what a government can do when it takes care of its money. It can fund more to Pharmac. Yeah. And if they were also not giving back that $3 billion, what more could they do?
To be able to do that.
To fund those, Pharmac would need even more money in the May budget.
I'd like to see us get average with the rest of the developed world. That would require right now a $2.25 billion.
$2.25 billion. So that's $500 million more, Chewy. So what they're doing now is filling the gap, and with $500 million more, would be able to move forward. But this government can't afford that. Can you think of any reasons they can't afford that, Chewy? Is there one particular reason that the government can't find another $500 million?
It's actually probably a couple there, Pat.
Yeah.
Landlords have got their fucking tin cup out and they're rattling it round.
I forgot about that.
And the rich people don't want to share. So there's two.
There you go. So look, I mean, it does actually strike me more. You know, there's three kinds of people in the world: people who think before they speak, as they speak, or after they speak. The ones who think after they speak are the most fun to be around. But I'm someone who typically thinks as he speaks, and as we're talking this out, I'm kind of going, yeah, actually, there's going to be a lot of new money that the current government's going to have to put in that the last government hasn't budgeted for in all sorts of areas of government. Because the last government isn't going to have planned all the way through the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So are we going to get this every 6 months or every 3 months? Them talking about fiscal cliffs. They left us a fiscal cliff, which just actually means, yeah, we needed to fund it today. They funded it last week, last year. Is that all it really means? This has got about 15 seconds. We'll just play the end of it.
Increase.
We'll be pleased with any increase that we get. We have no problem spending it.
There will be more funding for health in general, as we've talked about in the budget, and you'll have to see that as we get to the budget at the end of May.
That's a solid wait till budget day to find out.
There you go. So that's where we're at. So it's I guess because I don't have the knowledge to understand it fully, being frank, it feels like a good thing giving money to Pharmac. But it feels like a bad thing going, well, if we had just $500 million more, we'd have an A-class system at Pharmac. And then the government goes, well, we can't afford another $500 million, whilst they're giving $3 billion back to landlords. And this other thing about a new government's going to have to fund when the old program runs out. There's going to have to be a point where they pick up the funding and make their own decisions. Is that just what this government's calling a fiscal cliff, Chewy?
Yeah, they are. They're just setting themselves up for this to be used against them by the next government. Yeah, but there was a couple of comments that are they're reasonably big ones. But Labor put up the Pharmac budget 9% each year it was in government. It funded Pharmac on a 3-year cycle, which would have been renewed in this 2024 budget for another 3 years.
So it's that payment cycle.
Yeah, there were no fiscal cliffs. The Labor government funded in 3-year cycles to give entities certainty in their funding going forward. The manifesto had funding commitments for everything. So this talk of fiscal cliffs is just bullshit to lump blame on the Labor government, because if you blame the last lot, you've got carte blanche. And look, both sides are guilty for this. And in a lot of cases, both sides are actually right about this. You can blame the previous government for doing something wrong, but it's just, are you accurate in that criticism, or is it just the drape that you put over everything and go, all of this is somebody else's fault?
And we haven't even got into the look, to be honest with you, jobs for our mates, Paula Bennett being one of the people in charge of Pharmac now. But listen, I mean, I might get a bit of flack for this, but I don't have such a big problem with that, because that's what happens with the Labor does it as well. And I can accept.
Oh, I have a problem with it even when Labor.
But listen, I can accept that a group of people who are ministers know a group of people who they think would be good for that job, and typically they're going to align with them politically. Now, I don't like it, like you said, but I mean, did we jump up as Trevor Mallard in Ireland? Did we jump up and down about that? We probably did.
Yeah, that's different though. He's an ambassador, but this is. Let's talk about Paula Bennett for a little bit as my bile rises. Look, here is someone that did some disgraceful stuff when she was a minister. Absolutely, the gold standard for pulling up the ladder after you. Smashing it to bits, burning in it, and laughing at everybody that wanted to use the ladder after you.
True.
She leaves Parliament. She goes off to a cushy job working for real estate agents. And while she's doing that, she's doing TV appearances. Mm-hmm. She's doing columns. She is being the hype girl for the National Party and raising so much cash from wealthy donors, and now here's her reward. She's in for a cushy government job again. She's back on the tit.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. I guess I'm just saying I kind of
path is just.
I guess what I'm saying is I kind of understand it. I don't like it, but I mean, you know.
I mean, criticism can be leveled at the other side as well.
100%.
Like, Like I don't like this idea of being a minister and then ending up as a CEO of a government entity.
Yeah.
I don't like that. I don't like lobbyists for the most part. You know, you be a minister and then you duck out like and then you turn up on the lobbyist front. Is also something I dislike intensely. Yeah. There can be arguments and justifications there. I don't think Paula Benefit's got a single fucking one though.
Did you know you said Benefit there? Was that an accident or was that a Paula Benefit?
It was actually an accident, but I'm going to take it.
Yeah,
I'm happy with it.
You stick quiet. Couple of things on the super chat here. Dave Monster for $5. Thank you, sir. Says there are 3 types of mathematicians: those who can count, and those who can't.
Did you just call that a mathematician?
Did I? Maybe.
Yes, I think you did. Which I am going to steal whenever I make mashed potatoes. I'm going to say that I'm a mathematician.
Nice. And there's one other one as well. Bob Miller is a former political advisor in New Zealand and New York. He's interested in media, data, movies, and the conspiracy mindset. Bob's been on the show before. I'm going to put up what his take on the thing was. The one and only long-term aim for ACT being so involved in Pharmac and for National to help appoint a willing crony in Paula Bennett is to undo the fundamental system, it's terrifying, so that New Zealand's pharma landscape becomes as corrupt and ruined as America's. Yes. Everything else is obfuscation.
Yes, 100%.
Are we correctly terrified yet?
Yes. ACT standing around the foundations of some of our core socialized programs.
Yeah.
As a party that disagrees fundamentally with the idea of the government doing this sort of thing and wants the privatization of everything. Because they're not a libertarian party. They are a privatized fucking everything party.
Yeah. Yeah, libertarians, as long as you've got the money to make choices. That's the kind of libertarians they like.
Absolutely. You know, if you've got money, you deserve to live and have a nice life. And if you're poor, get back to work. Yeah, and I think that's when it comes through. When they're talking about libertarianism and freedom for all, get fucked. That's not what they're there for. They're there for corporates. They're there for their mates to make money, buying government associated things at fire sale prices, which they can then strip for assets and make mad bank.
Yeah,
that's the end goal for that, and everything that Seymour says that is drawing fire away from that should be seen for what it is. Speaking of ACT, are we gonna talk about an interview?
I think Chewy. I had one of the cleverer headlines in this video that we're doing right now. Do you like the part that says the A in ACT doesn't stand for arts?
Oh,
that's pretty good.
Arts hole.
Back to my radio days of alliteration.
Okay, so this article, viewers, if you haven't seen this article, immediately go and read it word for word. I read this during my lunch break, and the sharp turn halfway through had me cackling.
We're not gonna necessarily read all of it, but we'll give you a little
I would
thing.
love to do a dramatic reading of it, but yes, we
could
don't have
totally. Let's do that. Let's totally do that. Steve Braunius interviewed some no-name ACT person who he doesn't know called Todd Stevenson.
The photo as well is perfect. He looks like he's lost.
Yeah. And Todd Stevenson is the spokesperson for arts and culture. We're going to read you some of the conversation here. Do you want to do a dramatic reading? I can do questions, you can do answers, or shall I just read it?
No, just read it.
So Steve Braunius says this. So Todd, what an amazing first question. So Todd, I know really very little about you. Southland born and raised, worked in the pharmaceutical industry, lived in Sydney for 17 years, and now in Queenstown with a partner called Alex. Your hobbies include hiking. Why are you ACT spokesperson for arts? I don't know if Steve went in a bit grumpy, but that sounds like a pretty, okay. And he says, actually, it was a portfolio I asked for. I think arts and culture is important to a society. And when we were talking about who would be different spokespeople on different topics, I said I was quite interested in doing that. Steve Braunius, what's your experience or knowledge of the arts? I'm going to say, other than a consumer, very limited. It's not a good start. There's some parts of the arts sector I'm personally interested in, but yeah, it's an area I'm wanting to learn more about and I'm slowly getting to know. Steve Braunius.
Jesus Christ.
What parts are you interested in? Personally, along with my partner, I quite like musicals. So that's probably something we should go to when we have the opportunity, something we would go to. What musicals have you attended? I haven't for a little while, Steve, to be honest. As soon as someone says to be honest in the answer, it kind of means, this isn't a very good answer. I haven't for, and he says that a lot in this interview, I haven't for a little while, Steve, to be honest, but I think the last one I went to was Hamilton. I saw it in New York. Steve Braunius. I'm conducting the interview in my hat as the literary editor of books section at Newsroom. So what about literature? What's your experience or knowledge there? I'm going to be pretty straight up with you, Steve. I mainly read non-fiction, to be honest. So it's been a while since I read a novel. I'm going to admit that. What's your non-fiction taste? Well, the last one I actually read was about the Labour victory in Australia. I read a lot of kind of political biographies, and I'm obviously interested in campaigns. What about New Zealand books? That's an area I want to kind of learn a bit more about. It's something I'm hoping to develop as part of being the arts spokesperson. I haven't actually got into talking to anyone from the literary community yet, but that's on my list of areas I want to kind of get to know a bit more as I get into this portfolio. It's quite hard to read actually because he's got them verbatim. Are there any New Zealand authors who you've read? It's been a long time, to be honest, Steve. I'm just trying to think about the last one I would have read. Can I come back to you on that? I'll give that some thought as we're talking. No one's coming to mind, not a single New Zealand author. Not immediately. Let me come back to you. Here endeth part one, Joey. There is so much more. I'm going to read two parts. That's one part, Joey. You want to respond to that to start with?
Oh my God, what a dreadful interview. I think, because I know that there's this huge tone shift coming in this interview that really brings it to the forefront. But I think the first question is why haven't we heard from you? Like in the past, generally an arts and culture spokesperson has something to do with arts and culture. But yeah, who are you and why? It's some really basic questioning there that he fumbled.
Mm-hmm.
And then your next red flag is when you can't name anything New Zealand arts and culture related. You haven't attended anything in the country. You haven't read any books. What is your interest in the arts? Now he gets into this. The interest is, I don't think the government should provide any funding for art.
Yeah.
Which is just an absolute, because when you get into it, I bet there are things that they would fund. They would fund the ballet. They would fund the symphony orchestra. But they're not going to fund, Pacifica stuff, Māori stuff. Guarantee it. Absolutely guarantee it.
So let's look at that because that's the next part of the conversation. So they've just been talking a bit about funding. It's extremely progressive in Australia. What's it all about? I haven't looked at the Australian funding, etc., etc. And this is the question. So far, your only press release statement on anything to do with the arts has been your condemnation of Creative New Zealand giving the Prime Minister's Award for Poetry to Tuisiata Avea, which you object to because of her poem about James Cook. Yes, obviously,
here on the show.
I'm a very strong free speech advocate. It's so funny how these free speech advocates didn't like that poem so much and wanted it banned. But in that particular case, while she has the right to write what she wants, is Creative New Zealand supporting her something that most New Zealanders would see of value? That's the other thing about the arts. This is it's not like a moral majority to decide what is and isn't art. So it's not how it works. If you said that, what, does everybody like the certain kind of music which is deemed good enough to be? No, it doesn't have to be a majority to see if something's art. We've got to really ask ourselves, How can an agency like that actually represent the diverse, I suppose, views and what different New Zealanders would value? And, is it appropriate for them to be spending money on things like that? Are you aware of her body of work? I've read some of it. You've read one poem, haven't you?
I think he's lost the interviewer at this point. He's not an ally.
I've read a couple actually, but yeah, it's not something I would spend my time reading, to be honest. You wrote in the press statement about Tusiata, with the new government looking to make spending cuts at low-value departments, Creative New Zealand is tempting fate. Can you expand on that? From ACT's perspective, we're really saying, are the individuals in these organisations representing what the majority of New Zealanders would want to see supported? Well, it's funny that we talk, because I don't think the ACT party is representing what the majority of New Zealand would want to see supported, but they're still allowed to exist, aren't they? I don't think that they can do that. People have very individual tastes, and so it's better than individuals make those decisions rather than, I suppose, a bureaucratic agency imposing their choice on New Zealanders. You didn't know, did you? Because that poem got sent to everybody's letterbox and inbox, and they had to read it and get back to the government about what they thought about it. Here's the question you like most of all, Chewy. But you don't have individual taste yourself, do you? You're kind of an arts ignoramus, really, by your own reckoning.
Amazing. I will buy this guy a drink at this
The answer to that is no. I certainly have individual things that I like to go to. We talked about that earlier. You've been to see Hamilton. Well, I was just giving you an example of the things I like to do. What are your tastes other than musical? That's the main one in the creative sector. Musicals. I don't know if that was a question mark behind that. That's how I'm interpreting it. And I watch movies. I watch TV. I watch TV, says the ACT spokesman for the arts. Creative things are on TV. Are they not, Steve? Hear us end the lesson.
Now, someone, as someone that has tread the theatre boards in the past, can I just go on record and saying that musicals are the worst art? They are the worst one. No, I'm right. Yeah, look, art's a tricky thing. It's a subjective thing. And I think if you're going to be the spokesperson for arts and culture, maybe you should be able to articulate that thought at some point during an interview.
Can I offer something?
Great. Yeah.
Can I offer something? If the majority of New Zealanders like what you're producing in an artistic form, it doesn't need funding or support, because the majority of New Zealanders mean there'll be a big enough base for it to be supported. The stuff that actually needs funding and needs support is what get those off the screen, or we're ending this relationship right now, young man. It's actually the stuff that is provided to a niche audience, the stuff that's not perhaps liked by the majority that needs the funding, because we want to encourage all different kinds of art, even the stuff that the majority don't like. The stuff that the majority do like has a much better way or better place for it to be funded by the society that wants to participate in it. So actually, he's completely upside down.
No, Pat, the value in poetry is the money that will bring in sales. That's always been true. It's just, the reason why you should have someone that understands art or has been involved in the art scene as a spokesperson for arts and culture is understand the fundamental thing of putting on a production or spending a year writing a book of poetry or being in a band or these sort of things. There is no way that something like a symphony orchestra could ever turn a profit. But you go, it is worth it to have this in this country. Yeah. And traditionally, that's what we've done. We've gone, we need a national ballet company. We need a symphony orchestra. That's a sign of a real proper country. But that's a very European way of looking at things. When you open it up to all forms of culture, are we now talking about Kapahaka? Are we talking about Pacifica expressions of artistry and that sort of thing? Are we talking about the fringe festivals and stuff like that? You know, putting on a play, you have to rehearse it for sometimes months. You have people, you have a cast. Where does the money and time from that come from? You have to have someone take a punt on it. And we've spent the whole show talking about how if you've got money to take a punt on something, buy a fucking house. Don't invest money on a musical.
Or a hoodie.
Or a hoodie. No, you don't do any of it. So, look, the real reason that this guy has stuck up his fucking hand and said, I want to be the spokesperson for arts and culture, is that his belief is the government shouldn't have anything to do with arts and culture. New Zealand doesn't need art or culture.
Yep.
And if we do, the profitable one will step forward. And so we won't have a symphony orchestra. We won't have any of these things. I assume that all forms of culture will be done by the All Blacks. Which, to be honest, I might buy tickets to their rendition of Swan Lake, but we'll see. But
That's
yes, this is the thing. They want to chop government funding out of these things.
Yep.
And I think anybody involved in the art scene is absolutely fucking horrified.
Yep.
That this chump who watches TV sometimes, who saw a musical in New York at some point, and has not lived in this country for nearly 20 years, is now got an opinion on this sort of stuff. He's also, as pointed out in the chat, got record for being an absolute chump. Todd Stevenson was ex-Pharmac spokesperson during the election. He told Jack Tame that treatment decisions should be made with a productivity focus in mind. He worked for Verix Pharmaceuticals. So, yeah.
Now tell me
only
something.
get medicine if you are economically productive to society.
This is him,
that man.
Is this him?
Yep, that's him.
Okay, so have a listen to this. This is hilarious, hilariously terrifying. He's talking about the diversity in ACT. You having a listen? Listen to the diversity in ACT.
But as I think I said earlier, you know, I think ACT is wanting to deliver a really strong team to Parliament of diverse New Zealanders with different backgrounds. You know, you've got people who are from business, farming, small business owners, people with
have I said farming?
Degrees in like economics, and people who work in the corporate sector like myself. But as I think I said earlier,
that's ACT's list of diversity: business, farming, small business owners, degrees in economics, the corporate sector. That is ACT. So my tweet today was like, so much diversity: business, farming, small business owners with degrees in economics, and the corporate sector. That's his list of. And then you think about Tusi Arvia's poem, but that's what he thinks of as diversity. Like there was people who owned a dairy, and there was people who lived on a farm. How much more diverse do you need?
Because here's the thing. I'm not going to buy a ticket to the symphony orchestra. I've gone to a ballet a couple of times. You know, sometimes I'll read a poem. But I can go, these are things that improve New Zealand. They're not necessarily my personal tastes, but I'm glad that they're around.
Yeah.
And this is the difference. Maybe I'd be an ACT voter if I went, I don't want to see anything but punk music and sci-fi. So everything else has no value. And anybody involved in a musical needs to go into a camp.
We possibly have a guest coming on tomorrow night. So I think we'll do this story tonight. We actually haven't touched on James Shaw's resignation, which we should do. So we might do it tomorrow night, especially when he says in his interview in The Weekend with Jack Tame that he was very close to resigning his position under the Labour government because he wasn't happy. We should have given that some time today. We'll give it some time tomorrow. I am going to do this because we have a guest coming on tomorrow. And Chewie, just so you know, when I asked for the guest if she'd like to come on, she's the president of the Victorian University Students Association. She said, "Oh, my mum watches your show and she loves it." And I was like, how to feel really freaking old from the Gen Z group. So apparently,
Did you take that opportunity to go, yeah, I know your mum loves it?
No, gross. Don't be weird.
Missed opportunity.
No. So
this is why I don't ask for the interviewers.
the president's name is Michael Parkinson, I think is the surname, and had an interaction with Karen Oliver Plunket today. And Karen Oliver Plunket decided to tell the world that she doesn't seem to grasp the concept of free speech. My retort to that for Karen would be, he don't seem to grasp the concept of journalism. So we'll have a look at something for you, and I'll show you the shell game that Karen plays, all right? Because it's a really good example of that shell game. This is what the story was about. Free speech versus hate speech. Victoria University postpones debate after student backlash. Victoria University has postponed a planned debate on freedom of speech after concerns the event would become a platform for hate speech. Last week, student magazine Salient criticised the lack of diversity. He should speak to that guy from ACT. He knows all about diversity. Of the 5 confirmed panellists, signalling out the inclusion of the Free Speech Union's Jonathan Ayling as a consistent supporter of harmful rhetoric. Salient sub-editor Henry Broadbent said the Free Speech Union's support of anti-trans activists and the anti-co-governance campaign meant his inclusion compromised the safety of marginalised group on the campus. The speech that, quote, that's in brackets, the Free Speech Union are looking to defend is consistently speech that fits under the United Nations definition of hate speech. It's a really interesting way of framing it, actually. It's a good way of framing it. Mm-hmm. And this is the concern that we have with the university. Why is that you feel hate speech is legitimate discourse that shouldn't be suppressed? He said the presence of Corin Dan from Radio New Zealand as moderator and the Office of the Vice-Chancellor's assurances that statements would be fact-checked during the debate did little to persuade him that holding the event would not compromise the safety and well-being of marginalised groups attending the university. Now, if you haven't been with us for very long, you will probably not have heard me say this before. I'm someone who personally always errs towards more speech than left, but I don't think there's an absolute. There's no such thing as absolute free speechism or not. And if you think there is, yell fire in a theatre or threaten the politician's life sort of thing. There are restrictions on free speech. But I'm personally someone who tends to lean towards more speech rather than less. But I also acknowledge I'm not in one of the marginalised groups that often this free speech is targeted at, so I'm not a vulnerable person. So I always come into it with those kind of thoughts that this is not me who's being potentially vulnerable here, even though I personally lean towards free speech. I don't know, do you want to share what your thoughts are around that idea, Chewy? That's kind of where I sit personally. Chewy may be completely different.
I think it's very easy to say that you're a free speech absolutist and then not be able to handle the jandal at all, which is where Elon Musk finds himself at the moment.
Yeah, true.
Because he is trying to defend showing footage of the stabbing in a church in Sydney recently, and the fact that the Christchurch mosque shooting keeps on popping up on his fucking platform. And the Australian and New Zealand governments keep on saying, can you pull this footage? And he goes, no, I believe in free speech. However, if anybody on that platform dares criticize Elon, banned.
Yeah.
Even
there's also now the stabbing in Sydney, the stabbing of that pastor or cleric, or whatever it was in Sydney.
So that's
popping up all
the
over.
one that there's footage of it circulating around. But it's not true. And do you know how I know it's not true, Pat? They still haven't unbanned my Twitter account that got banned for saying Leo Malloy is small enough to stuff in a sandwich bag and throw off a bridge.
Yeah.
Which is obviously a joke and not a threat. Whereas a friend of mine who's still on that platform reported an actual threat to murder someone and got a reply back that wasn't a breach of terms of service. So, it's funny that these guys that hold themselves up as free speech absolutists, it's always one side of the argument that they're coming down on. I don't think that anyone is a free speech absolutist.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think there's any value in Hitler 2.0 coming up with his new greatest hits and thoughts on Mein Kampf. We've had that discussion. We all got involved. We all decided in the 40s it wasn't a good idea.
Yep, I agree.
But one of the things you've always got to consider is, are these things able to be reversed and used against us? Free speech is also not unlimited access to every platform.
Yeah, that's not it. Yeah.
Yeah, free speech is the ability to say something and not end up in jail. be black bagged by the government. And everybody that talks about free speech seems to equate it as I should be able to say whatever hateful shit I want with absolutely zero consequences from anyone.
Yeah, because free speech is about the government. I mean, that's what it's based on in America. It's about the government's restrictions. If someone wants to come on this podcast and we go no, and they go why, and we go because we don't like what you're saying, that's not a free speech issue. That's just the decision we've chose to make because this is our platform. We can do what we want. Likewise, the thing about the Victoria University is the students raised a concern. The university made a decision. And of course, now the students are being vilified that they've done something wrong. They haven't done anything wrong. They've made a cogent argument with their position. They've actually used their free speech, and they have explained to the university why they'd like the university to rethink this, and the universities rethink that. And that seems to be a fairly okay thing. Let me play this for you now. I'm not playing you a lot. I know you guys hate to see old Karen when she pops up or he pops up or whatever pronoun Oliver's using these days. I have cut it very short compared to what it was because Michael got on, obviously got berated by Plunket a lot, got shouted over, got talked down a lot. But he starts the conversation with basically saying what's wrong with the Free Speech Union. He continues the conversation going, give me examples. You can't give me one example. Give me an example. And Michael's like, there's plenty out there. Look it up. No, you've made give me an example. And so we get to the part of the conversation. You can see they've only been talking for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, maybe 4 minutes. And Michael gives him an example. And one of the reasons they were uncomfortable with the Free Speech Union, as it said in that article from RNZ, is the kinds of the kinds of opinions that the Free Speech Union has been supporting. And one of the examples is supporting the opinions of Julian Batchelor, helping further that narrative. Mm-hmm. So when we come into this part of the conversation, it's important to know, right, that Plunket is shouting at Mark Hale about evidence why, that Julian Batchelor has said anything wrong. Remember, they're not saying Julian Batchelor is bad. They're saying the Free Speech Union has been supporting views like Julian Batchelor, because I'll show you where Plunket don't journalist very well. So, right where we're at is there's a connection. It's the Free Speech Union supporting the views of people like Julian Batchelor. That's where we come into the conversation.
We're going to
okay. Give us one of those instances, please.
Sean, I don't think that it's reasonable for me to.
I think it's entirely reasonable when you make a statement in a live interview, you say there are instances or examples. I ask you for instances, examples, and you say I'm not going to give them to you.
All right, Sean. Look, I think you can Google any sort of news article. There's been news articles about the Free Speech Union's inability to...
Give me and point me to one of those news articles right now.
So basically, Sean Plunket is using this tool that if you can't provide evidence, then you lose the debate. It's as simple as that. So what does Mark Hale do? Provides the evidence.
Sure. There's an RNZ article which is titled Māori Refuse Entry to Stop Co-Governance Meeting.
Okay, let's have a look at that.
This is Sean Plunket's brain exploding, trying to figure out how to now get around this.
Maori refuse, what was it? Refuse.
And this is a boomer trying to figure out how to Google, by the way. He's trying to Google in real time. It's not a good look.
Maori refuse entry to stop co-governance meeting.
Okay, well, you can read it. You've got it in front of you, obviously. What does it say?
I don't, because I'm locked out of my Facebook.
Who's it by, for a start?
Yeah, because that matters.
It's by Maya Hart.
Okay, all right, yep.
It says that Batchelor stopped a Marlborough filmmaker from coming in because Batchelor didn't believe that he was a good Māori who would sit there and listen and be respectful all the way through.
Okay, so we don't... okay, so straight off...
So let's make this clear. I know you've just heard it because Plunket's going to repeat it incorrectly. There was a man that came to one of Julian Batchelor's meetings. This is after a conversation where Plunket's gone, there's no evidence that they stopped anyone due to race. There's no evidence for the Julian... I've covered them. There's no evidence. So she's just given from an article about a Māori filmmaker who was refused entry for, and this is a quote from Julia, quote, because he wouldn't be a, quote, good Māori who would sit there and listen and be respectful all the way through. That's why the person was turned away, right? Now, they're a filmmaker. They weren't talking about filming.
Off the bat, the headline's misleading. He refused entry to a film, someone, not just anyone off the street who wanted to come to his meeting. He refused entry for someone who wanted to film the meeting.
It doesn't say that he wanted to film. It just says he was trying to attend. He's just known as a filmmaker.
Oh, he is a filmmaker. Okay, so a filmmaker gets told he can't come to a public meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not actually a blanket race ban, is it? It's one individual.
So due to the fact that he's not a good Māori, that was the quote given by Julian Batchelor.
Yeah, so it's only... and he's not speaking at the event, right?
Jesus.
This is the flip.
Julian Batchelor isn't speaking at the event, right?
No, he's not.
And he's not part of the Free Speech Union, right?
There's the flip.
No, but...
So why are you getting down on Jonathan Ayling about something that Julian Batchelor may or may not have said?
There's the spin. There's the spin. Did you see it? So remember, I'll say it again. That went from, we're uncomfortable with the Free Speech Union because they support views like Julian Batchelor. And at the end of it, the defence that Plunket had was, but that's got nothing to do with the Free Speech Union. They're not Julian Batchelor. No, but he's totally flipped it. He's done the shell game, and he's now saying that Julian Batchelor's not speaking. What's that got to do with Jonathan Ayling? When the whole conversation was, well, it's because people like Jonathan Ayling and the Free Speech Union are supporting Julian. But that was my example with what Markel was saying. That's the example of who the Free Speech Union are supporting and why we're uncomfortable with the Free Speech Union. And he flipped it at the end, and that's why I said that... he might be saying that she doesn't understand free speech, but it feels very, very clear to me, Chewy, that he does not understand journalism. Now, I've spoken to Mark Hale on email today. She was going to come on tonight, but we knew I had a really full show, so we might bring her on tomorrow night and give her some space to actually maybe talk about it and see what they've got to say. Sir.
Yeah. For anyone that is listening that might consider going on the platform, your best advice is not to. Don't give them the content. Don't give them the satisfaction. The second thing I would say is, if you do make the decision to go on the platform, is don't let Oliver drag you off the point.
Yeah.
Because he moved into uncharted territory by demanding. And then you're moving away from the point that you're trying to make, and he won. He is very good at that. It's nonsensical. Yep. It's frustrating.
Yep.
But he ended that on a win for him.
Yep.
Don't give him wins.
Yep. So he basically ended up by starting the conversation by going, give me evidence of some abhorrent views, my words, that the Free Speech Union have, that the abhorrent views that the Free Speech Union support. And she said, Julian Batchelor. And he ended it by saying, Julian Batchelor's got nothing to do with the Free Speech Union and he's not speaking at that event. Dum, shell game. That's how it works. And I don't know if I call it a win, Joey, but he certainly spun it. And with respect, not with respect, some of his listeners or viewers are too dumb to figure out the shell game because it suits their narrative to just continue on. They can't see that the thing he said at the end was the opposite to what he said at the start. And that's why we, unfortunately, have to highlight it for you.
Yeah. Look, and you can see in the news at the moment where this sort of stuff can go.
Yeah.
So when these guys start talking about free speech, look at what's happening at the universities over in the States, right? I saw a comparison the other day of what was happening in, I think, was it Ohio? Columbus, at their university there of basically armed police and riot gear beating up students for saying maybe Israel shouldn't bomb civilians quite so hard. And the comparison that was drawn in the video was only 6 months ago, there were uniformed people marching under Nazi flags, espousing Nazi views that were allowed to march by the police on the point of view of free speech.
Yep. I've actually contacted a couple of...
It's always that way, isn't it? Oh, we've got to let these fucking horrible people say what they want to say because of free speech. But the moment that the narrative is something that we don't like, we are going to pepper spray you, we are going to beat you, we are going to shut you down. So, yeah, be very wary of any free speech absolutist.
Well, that's also there. Well, let's not get into this debate, but that's where the Atlas Network is going around the world under free speech absolutists. And I've already connected with a university academic who was arrested at one of those in America, and Jill Stein running for president. She got arrested at one of them as well, and I've messaged her team to see if we can get someone. And I've also just found a new YouTuber who I'm quite enjoying called Denims at the moment, and she does some commentary. I think she's mostly on Twitch, and I'm going to send her an email as well and see if we can get some people from over there to come and tell us about what they're seeing, what's going on. Yeah, I know, 120 minutes, we're way over. We actually said on a tweet today that it was going to be 180, Chewy. And to be honest, we kind of have not given James Shaw his due credit, and we're still close to 2 hours. But people are here. Look at the numbers that are watching us live. It's wicked. So let's get to some of the super chats before we head off for the night. Because I care, thank you for the super chat. We all know where David Seymour's fiscal hole is, don't we? $5, Mr. Arvids. My guy failed the meme. Oh, your arts minister name and art. He literally can't. LOL. Yeah, that was ridiculous. Mr. Arvids again. Gosh, Mr. Arvids, it's your thank you. Just send us a normal chat sometimes. It's all good. I got lost on my first day of work. Selfie time. That was to the to that photo. Heckenbees, thank you for the $10 super chat. Just to tell Chewy he's wrong about musicals. Yeah. 100%. Got to get that out.
Gotta love that rage engagement.
Act is fecal action from Ian. Is that fecal? $2 super chat. Thank you very much for that. Because I care. So ACT leader isn't alone in the worst kind of person. Maybe it's the whole party. And I think finally on the super chats from Nick, tip for the record show length. It's probably close to it. I think some of the ones we did over the election for the things are probably more than 2 hours. But yeah, it's been a long one, but it's been a good one. And we thank you for being with us. Is there anything else we want to mention before we head off into the night, Chewy? I should never ask you that. Tangent.
Brendan Christie says, Chewy, I will sing you the whole soundtrack to Cats and change your mind. I don't think that will change my mind, Brendan. I think that will reinforce my position.
What about Hamilton? What about Rocky Horror Picture Show? You must be into Rocky Horror Show.
I do like Rocky Horror Picture Show. But like, I did too many musicals in my high school years. I like this comment. Culture shouldn't be about profit. Art isn't meant to be a commercial enterprise. Act and everything must be business, and capitalism is such a toxic fucking ideology. Yeah, absolutely. No public art, just car parks.
Yeah.
And I knew that when we started talking about free speech that this would pop up. And JK, Karl Popper, if everyone is tolerant of every idea, then intolerant ideas will emerge. Tolerant people will tolerate this intolerance, and the intolerant people will not tolerate the tolerant people. I've seen a version of that is intolerant. No, it's gone. Never mind.
It's gone.
There's a version of that is quite good.
There is just a debate going on in the chat right now about musicals. Cats is appalling. Les Mis is great. It's funny. I like musicals because I'm cultured. No, I actually like musicals. My dad liked musicals, and it's a family thing. He was growing up at school in the late 50s, 1958. He would have been 18, and so his era was all Gilbert and Sullivan, Pirates.
Yeah, so that's
and that kind of stuff.
That's very much shaped my perception. My drama teacher loved Gilbert and Sullivan.
But I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so I'm, what's your name? Lloyd, Webber, and Rice. That's my kind of thing. And it's kind of cool to see my kids growing up now, and they're all Lin-Manuel Miranda and Rent. And so they're getting stuff that's been made sort of from the 90s. So I was getting stuff made in the 70s, even though it was the 80s, 90s, because that's when it flows through the high schools. It's kind of 15 to 20 years later. And they're all my kids are all into the stuff that's from the 90s and stuff now. So I like it. I think it's kind of cool. I'm into it. And Chewy, if you say another word against it, honestly, we're getting divorced.
So Deadbird brings up Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
I have been to see Book of Mormon. I saw it in the East End in London because I'm very fancy. And I know people love that. And by all accounts, I should have loved it as well.
You weren't a fan?
Hated it. I felt like I was the one person in the room that just wasn't getting it. And I hated it. I love South Park. I love satire. It was very clearly what it was supposed to be doing. I was just looking at it going, yep, everybody on stage is technically very proficient. And I'm just not enjoying this. There's something about musicals that just kicks me out.
Fair enough. Book of Moron, says Cliff. I like that. All right, we're going to go. People are encouraging us to pad for 10 more minutes, but I'm going to cut it short. 10 minutes under 2 hours.
You got to leave them wanting.
Yeah, I wonder if anyone in the audio podcast has made it till here. Send us an email in the audio podcast if you made it to an hour 50. BigHeroNews@gmail.com. And we'll talk to you then. All right, team. Thanks for joining us tonight. It's been fun. Great show. Thank you so much to Craig Renney for coming on board and educating primarily me. You guys knew all the answers, but primarily me. And look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow night from 9 p.m. For another edition of Big Hairy News. Come back tomorrow night. Bring your friend. We'll catch you then. Hooroo.
Cheers, man.